السلام عليكم. الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. There are often verses in Quran that either repeat or are similar in the meaning and concept on conveying similar messages, especially at the beginning of some chapters. Today we will discuss chapter 27 called Naml or ants, verses 1 through 6. It starts with some of these typical verses, and the hope is once we understand these verses, we can get a general idea. So when we see these types of verses elsewhere in the Quran, we have similar understanding, or at least a background. We will give one example of such similarity from chapter 2 that further explains and complements what we discuss here in chapter 27. This surah chapter was revealed in Mecca shortly after Surah 26, the Poets, and it follows the same pattern, an introduction and conclusion which spell out the subject matter. In between, there are several historical accounts that emphasize the main theme, providing further explanation of it. The history within these chapters help us draw parallel between the attitudes of the unbelievers in Mecca on the one hand and the earlier communities on the other. Thus, the surah reveals a pattern which advocates of Islam in any generation need to think about, contemplate. As in all Meccan surahs, chapters, the main theme is faith, to believe in one God and worship Him alone, without partners, and to believe in the resurrection, as well as the concept of reward and punishment in the hereafter. The chapter Surah 27 is named after ants or Naml, which are mentioned in verse 18. Ants, along with bees and spider, are insects mentioned in the Quran and chapters named after them. It is interesting that Quran names 3 chapters after these creatures, as each have their own characteristics. And we human beings tend to have qualities that are similar to their characteristics. For example, ants are very organized, build elaborate homes above and underground, and tend to be gatherers. They always tend to collect food and store regardless of using it. Human beings have similar qualities. We tend to collect and store, especially when it comes to wealth. On the other hand, the spiders do not store much. They just set up a very fragile net or trap, a fragile home, and sit there and wait right there to catch, another insect which will become their food. The bees, on the other hand, are not only very organized and also build homes with certain architecture, they don't just sit on anything, not even any flower. They choose the best flower for pollination. They then produce honey, which is something that benefits others, like human beings and bears and perhaps other creatures. As such, we have human beings that do things that benefit others. These are similar qualities. We already talked about bees in an earlier session, and we'll cover a spider in the future, inshaAllah. It is also interesting that 1400 years ago, Quran talks about these 3 creatures before the likes of Maurice Meterlqine and other, researchers write books about the ants and the bees. This surah starts with good news and guidance for the believers and how disbelievers are unable to comprehend and receive such good news and guidance. Followed by examples of earlier prophets and their ummah, nations, two of which mentioned are Dawood and Sulaiman, peace be upon them, to whom Allah bestowed so many favors, including the kingdom over many creatures beyond humans, and the favor of wealth, and with Sulaiman, the communication with these creatures, one of which was ants, plus the knowledge and wisdom and judgment, sound judgments. Hence, these two prophets had the biggest, most powerful kingdoms ever ruled on earth. This to give assurance to the believers, Muslims in Mecca, that the same God will be with them and will support them. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تاسين تلك آيات القرآن وكتاب مبين. Tasin, these are verses of the Quran, a book that makes things clear. Verse 1. Regarding the first letters in beginning of some chapters in the Quran, we have talked about extensively in the Jalasa. But to make it short, there have been multiple explanations on which we can say, according to some commentators, these letters are the short abbreviation of God's attributes. Just like we abbreviate, for example, alayhi salam as AS, here, for example, Ta means bountiful, as in that taul. And Sin could be to his attribute of Sami'a. Sami' means hears all. And other places we have, like for example, Ra, which means Rahman. It's an abbreviation of Rahman, Rahim, or Rahim. So, and there are other letters as well. Yet there is another explanation which can be added to what we just said, and that is Ta-Sin as reference to the basic material, that is the letters of which the surah and the entire Quran are composed. These letters are available to all Arabic-speaking people, yet they are all unable to compose anything like the Quran. They have been challenged to do so, yet none has ever produced anything that approximates the excellence of the Quran. That is the value of letters, that while ordinary, when combined, will make such a masterpiece as verses of the Quran. These two letters are followed by a reference to the Quran itself, as it says, those are verses of the Quran, a book which makes things clear. Verse 1. Of course, here, tilka, or the term those, means referring to the high position in terms of superiority and nobility, not distance. It should be noted that in the Arabic text, the conjunction wa, which means and, occurs after the word Quran. Al-Quran wa kitabin mubin. But in this usage, it means which is. Which is. This is the book which makes things clear. Describing the Quran here as a book provides a subtle element of comparison with how the unbelievers in Mecca received the book bestowed on them from on high, and how the Queen Sheba and her people received Sulaiman's letter, which in this surah it is also called Kitab, meaning book. Yet Sulaiman and all prophets are no more than God's servants. So the book makes things clear for all people, not just select few. Quran was not revealed for a special class of people. Anyone can pick up the Quran and read it. and get at least a basic understanding of majority of the verses. Enough to guide any human beings. It is not just for Arabs, it is for all. Language is just the mean to express a concept. You might be surprised to know that only 20% of Muslim population around the world is Arab. There are many good Quranic translations in virtually all languages around the world today. This is where a novice can start. The only requirement is that he needs to read it with an open heart. We'll talk more on this in a few seconds. Then it continues, it says, Hudam wa bushra lil mu'minin, a guide and glad tiding, good news for the believers. Verse 2. The Quran or the book is then described as a guidance and a glad tiding to the believers. Indeed, the way the description is phrased makes the very entity of the Quran as the guidance and the good news. For sure, the Quran provides guidance to believers in every way and every sense. To all believers, not just a specific group. It also gives them what brings happiness, both in this life and in the life to come. Of course, we know there is another aspect of the mission prophets had, and that was to warn. Andhar means warn, but here Quran is addressing the believers who are already aware of this fact. They already have submitted to the truth, heard the warnings, and rejected the path where their desires and or shaitan may take them. In a lecture called Why Prophets, we already talked about the fact that creation of human being is not complete without the guidance, without the instruction from God, and that human beings will not reach the peak of perfection or excellence without guidance, because intellect or aql by itself is not enough. So we will not get into this detail, but here the verse says only the believers are privileged to receive the guidance and the subsequent good news. The fact that guidance and the happy news are given to the believers only is especially significant here. The Quran, you will note that the Quran is not a book of theoretical or applied science that gives all its benefits to whoever reads and understands it. The Quran addresses hearts in the first instance and gives all its light and fragrance to an open mind and open heart which receives it with certainty and contentment. When a person's mind is refreshed with firm belief, it can better appreciate the Quran and understand far more of its meanings than one can imagine. It brings about miraculous changes in his life as he adopts the new way of life and discards the old one. All the systems, legislation, reminders, and values that Quran promotes are based first and foremost on faith. Therefore, a person who is not fair-minded, who is not unbiased and does not even have an open heart, or as Quran says, has a diseased or sealed heart, one who does not believe in God or accept that this Quran is revealed by God, cannot find the desired guidance in the Quran and will not share the good news it brings. This book, the Quran, contains inexhaustible treasures of guidance, knowledge, and sound directives. But faith is the key to opening it all. Without this key, the Quran does not give its treasure to anyone. Hence, those who truly, truly believed in it were able to accomplish miracles. But when the Quran was reduced to no more than chants set to charming tunes like recitation that people enjoyed hearing without touching their hearts, or they put it on the shelves and recited it only on formal events like the funerals and weddings, it remained an unopened treasure, incapable of achieving anything. Now, who are the believers verse 2 is talking about? This surah outlines the qualities of these believers who receive guidance and happy news. Quran gives 3 of their characteristics, 2 of which have to do with their actions, and 1 has to do with their aqidah, belief system. الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة وهم بالآخرة هم يوقنون. They are the ones who attend regularly to prayers and pay their zakat, and who firmly believe in the life to come. Verse 3. So the first quality is to attend regularly to prayers, offering it as it should be offered, with their hearts and souls conscious of the fact that they are standing in front of God in all His majesty. Therefore, they feel themselves in contact with His sublime presence, and their thoughts fully attentive to addressing and glorifying Him. Here, yuqimuna means they establish. They do it regularly. They do not skip prayers. We have other verses in Quran that say, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. Those who guard, observe their prayers. Chapter 23, verse 9. Or, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ. Those who are constant or consistent in their prayers. Chapter 70, verse 23. So, if we were to consolidate all these verses on salat, on prayer, or you could say tafsir by Quran, it would be they are the ones who attend regularly to prayers and keep them on time consistently. The complete package. Secondly, they pay their zakat, which is the obligatory poor due. This is among the verses that says zakat is wajib, obligatory. When they pay it, not only they cleanse their wealth, they cleanse their hearts of stinginess, rising above the love for wealth and money. They rise above all that. They give their fellow man some of what God has granted them, thus fulfilling their social duty toward their community. Hence, zakat is a form of ibadah, worship, and one of the pillars of Islam. So, first, keep the relationship with Allah through prayers, salat, and then keep the relationship with people through zakat. The third, final, they firmly believe in the life to come, which means that their faith in the hereafter remains topmost in their thoughts. It prevents them from giving in to their desires and keeps their fear of God alive in their hearts. They fear, what is their fear? They fear they might be considered disobedient when they come before Him for judgment. They fear that. They fear to be embarrassed when they come before Him. This gives them a sense of accountability. Believers know that that is when the ultimate justice will be served. That in itself gives them hope, knowing that when someone does good all his life in this world, yet not quite get rewarded, or someone who does many evil acts but not quite get punished, hereafter is when they will be fully rewarded or punished. Of course, believers' qualities are not limited to these three that we just mentioned. This is just a partial list of the believers' characteristics. And there are other places in Quran where we are given more comprehensive description of their qualities. In the chapter called, for example, Believers or Mu'minun, chapter 23, verses 1 through 11 goes through these qualities. Or chapter 31, Surah Al-Luqman, verse 4. Or verses alike. For example, in chapter 2, verses 2, 3, and 4, 2 through 4, Quran gives similar characteristic, but said in a different way, including the, adding a couple of more, like the unseen, ghaib, which we now briefly will discuss, to add more explanation for above verses of, verses 2 and 3. In chapter 2, we read, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. This is the book. In it is guidance, without a doubt, to those who fear Allah, those who are God conscious, or those who are careful of their duties to God. Keep in mind, the verse is not saying that Quran will have nothing to do with those who are not God conscious, muttaqin. It just says that Quran first and foremost speaks to those who are muttaqin. It says those lil muttaqin, those who are muttaqin. In other words, any persons at any time or place who are actively seeking righteousness, morality, and guidance, Quran is addressing them first. So they find what they seek and then perhaps become instruments for the others to seek guidance and righteousness. It then describes the qualities of this type of people in the next verses. الذين يقيمون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. And then والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون. Those who believe in the unseen, ghaib, and attend regularly to prayers and spend out of what we have provided for them, and who believe in that which is revealed unto you, O Muhammad, and that which was revealed before you, and are certain of the hereafter, firmly believe in everlasting next life. Chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. So in this chapter 2, same qualities like the prayer, the zakat, and hereafter are repeated, as in verse 3 of Surah Al-Naml that we just talked about. But two other things are added. Those who believe in ghaib, the unseen, and then that which was revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the prophets before, which is the book, or you could say revelations. Now, just a little explanation on ghaib. Ghaib, or unseen, is what lies beyond the reach of human perception. It is hidden from our physical senses, and only human intellect, aql, can discover it. Belief in the unseen or imperceptible, is a major threshold in human understanding, and crossing it elevates man above animals and takes him far beyond the physical world of the senses or all the devices. It raises human consciousness to a level where a wider and fuller world can be perceived. Such a step has far-reaching effects on man's understanding of his own existence and the existence of everything else around him. It also points to the everlasting truth that includes all the beginnings and all the ends, which is always unseen and can be no other than the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Creator. Now, some commentators have said ghaib includes also hereafter and the revelation, but those are separately mentioned in verse 4. So it's not a repeat of that. Verse 3 says muttaqin, the God conscious. The God conscious are those who already use their intellect, aql, and have confirmed the existence of unseen world. And as a result, they are those who attend regularly to their prayers and on time, consistently, as we discussed. Then they give from that which Allah has provided for them, which is zakat, as we talked. So verse 4 of chapter 2 then adds, and who believe in that which is revealed unto you, Muhammad, and that which was revealed before you, and are certain of the hereafter, firmly believe in everlasting next life. Which mentions the belief and acknowledgement of muttaqin, the God conscious, about the concept of nubuwwah, or prophethood, and the books or revelations. They believe that after believing in God, the unseen, there has to be a guidance to answer the questions about the truth and the falsehood. After the prophethood and the books, it then talks about hereafter and says that believing in hereafter completes the belief in God. Because how could the one who created everything with a purpose then be indifferent to human deeds and misdeeds, what an individual did and did not do? Therefore, if there is God, which there is, then there has to be a finality, destiny, and ultimate conclusion for all humans where they will meet the consequence and conclusion of their actions. On the next verse, then touches on the conclusion for those muttaqin, the God conscious. أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون. These are guided by their lords. These are guided by their Lord. These surely are the prosperous and the successful. Verse 5, chapter 2, verse 5. The description and behavior of muttaqin, the God conscious, is above verses 2 and through 5 from chapter 2, gives the news that these individuals are the ultimate winners and salvation is theirs. Of course, it is only such obedient believers who can hope for God's reward. Yet, they will not discount his punishment. They will always keep that in mind. So, Islamic belief follows after believing in one God, Allah, then hereafter. These two are the foundation. Then other articles like the messengers, the book, etc. will follow. Back to Surah Al-Naml, chapter 27. The next verse talks about the disbelievers. Strong emphasis is placed on believing in the hereafter, akhirah. in the form of a stern warning to those who refuse to believe and persist with their wrong ways. إن الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة زين لهم أعمالهم فهم يعمهون. As for those who will not believe in the life to come, we make their deeds seem fair, seem pleasing to them. And so they wander about blindly in distraction, astray. Verse 4, Surah Al-Naml, verse 4. Believing in the life to come is the motive that keeps whims and desires in check, urging us to lead a life of moderation. When such belief is lacking, a person cannot restrain himself from pursuing wanton desires, thinking that the only chance for him to indulge in pleasure is offered in this life, because this is the only life. When someone has the means to lead a life of indulgence, what can stop him from pursuing his wildest pleasures unless he realizes he has to stand before God awaiting his judgment, reward or punishment? Of course, the pleasure and indulgence referred here is the one that exceeds without bounds. Indeed, a person lacking belief in the hereafter will inevitably pursue every pleasure within his ability. No sense of shame or check will restrain him. It is in the nature of human beings that they love pleasure, and unless they are guided by a divine message that tells them of a future, the permanent life that follows this short one, and that the latter is nothing but preparation for the future life, they won't know. They won't get it. If they heed this guidance, then they will find much greater pleasure in different types of pursuits. It is Allah who has molded human nature in this fashion, giving it the tendency to follow God's guidance when He opens His receptive faculties to this, and the opposite tendency to remain blind when it shuts down such faculties. You know, Allah's will is always done in both situations. Hence the Quran says, in reference to those who will not believe in the hereafter, we make their deeds seem fair, seem pleasing to them, and so they wander about blindly in distraction. They choose not to believe. Other places in Quran it says, زَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَعْمَالَهُم. Shaitan made their deeds seem fair, seem pleasing to them, which is all inclusive that God's law comes into operation, making their deeds seem fair and attractive to them. They cannot see any foul element, anything wrong in what they do, and so remain unable to find a clear way leading them to the right path. Their aql, intellect, starts justifying what they are doing is okay. Bottom line, their lack of belief in akhirah, hereafter, caused them to wander about in this world blindly or in distraction. Their goal is not set by Allah, the Creator. Their goal, they have their own man-made goals, which are usually in line with their desires, hence will lead them astray. Here, فَهُمْ يَعْمَهُونَ means they continuously behave as such. The surah then continues with their destination. When evil seems fair to them, the end result is well known and inevitable. أولئك الذين لهم سوء العذاب وهم في الآخرة هم الأخسرون. These are the ones for whom grievous suffering is in store, and who in the life to come shall be the worst losers. In the life to come, they shall be the worst losers. Verse 5. Whether suffering is given to them in this present life or in the life to come, they will have to face utter ruin in the hereafter. It will be their just recompense for pursuing what is evil. You might ask, wait, is this suffering just for not believing in hereafter? No, not at all. We explained that because they do not believe in the day of accountability, they have no limit on what they will do and nothing stopping them, because whatever they do seems fair, seems attractive to them. That is exactly what is happening in our world today. And that is why you see so much injustice, so much cruelty, and so many who have been wronged, or individuals who are wronged on individual basis or in a societal basis. People justify what they do. Like, well, they have lots of money, the big house, the boat. Why can't I have all that? I'm not doing anything wrong. Or nobody sees me doing this. What they don't know won't hurt them. Or they won't find out. It's all legal. So these are the type of justifications they bring. Furthermore, few verses later, on verses 13 and 14, Quran does give an example of their characteristic when talking about the people whom Moses, peace be upon him, had to deal with, as Quran says. So the same disbelievers Quran talks about in verses 13 and 14, which says, "But when signs came to them, plain, to see, visible, to see, that is visible, they said, this is plain sorcery, magic. Within their souls, they knew them to be true. Yet, they rejected them unjustly and in their arrogance. Consider then what happened in the end to the evildoers, the corrupt, the mischief makers." So, what happens to them at the end is justified. Verses 13 and 14. Often the disbelievers, as the verse says, know deep down what the truth is, yet they reject it and continue with their corrupt and mischievous conduct. Some say, you know what? I know this all makes sense to me, but I'm in a point in my life that I don't have time for religion now. I will think about it later, maybe when I'm a little bit older. Or those who, knowingly, falsely reject God and the last day because it's inconvenient to them. This is an example of the type of people in verse 5, where it says they were given numerous signs to bring the truth clearly before their eyes. Indeed, these signs are described here as plain to see or visible, which is rather an inadequate rendering of the Arabic adjective mubsira. Mubsira, we have translated it as visible, plain to see, which means, but it really means endowed with insight, as if the signs themselves can see the people and lead them to the divine guidance. Yet, they describe these signs as a plain sorcery, plain magic. Although, deep inside, they were convinced that these were true signs confirming the truth of the message. They nevertheless repeated such claims out of, and then Quran says, their arrogance and unjustly. Yet within their souls they knew them to be true. Their attitude was one of stubborn rejection because they did not seek proof. They just did not want to believe. أولئك الذين لهم سوء العذاب وهم في الآخرة هم الأخسرون. These are the ones for whom grievous suffering is in store, and who in the life to come shall be the worst losers. The same was true of Quraysh elders. They were certain of the truth of the Quran, but they persisted in denying it and rejecting the Prophet's call to believe in God alone, in Allah alone. They wanted to continue with their false beliefs because of the privileges and gains they felt would be threatened if they were to abandon their religion. They realized that such gains and privileges depended totally on their, false beliefs, and that Islam was sure to do away with them. They felt their position to be very shaky compared with the clear truth of Islam. Such is the truth. Its rejectors do not deny it out of ignorance. They deny it because they know it to be the truth and realize that it threatens their interests and privileges. Hence, they deliberately reject it. Back to verse 6, وَإِنَّكَ لَتُلَقِّي الْقُرْآنَ مِنْ لَدُنْ حَكِيمٍ عَلِيمٍ. Most certainly you receive the Quran from the presence of one who is wise and all-knowing. These verses are not coming from anyone else except Allah, who is all-wise and knowing. They are certainly not from your imagination, like a poet's imagination, takhayyul. These are not poems, nor your dreams, or coming from another book, as the idolaters used to suggest. You're not a poet, you're not a magician, or just reporting what others have told you. The surah's opening is completed with this verse 6 that we just recited. A verse that re-emphasizes the divine source of Quran. Most certainly you receive the Quran from the presence of one who is wise and all-knowing. The Arabic verb tulaqqa, which is rendered here as you receive, quote unquote, gives a sense of the Quran being a sublime gift presented by the one who does everything wisely and plans everything on the basis of perfect knowledge. Indeed, Allah's wisdom and knowledge are clearly seen in the Quran. The surah then continues with historical accounts which provide a panoramic exhibition of aspects of God's wisdom, knowledge, planning, and care in following verses with stories of earlier prophets. These are some of the fundamentals of Islamic faith Quran talks about, and as indicated, it repeats them throughout Quran in different ways. We ask Allah to strengthen our iman, our belief in Him and the hereafter. We ask Allah to make us among the God conscious He describes in Quran, and help us fulfill our duties to Him and to others. We ask Allah to make us among the muflihun, the successful in this world and the hereafter. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. والسلام على من اتبع الهدى.